grew up being taught that America is a melting pot because everyone came from someplace else, and that all the immigrants should assimilate into American culture. Anybody else grow up with that in school? Yeah. The term melting pot came about in 1908 from a play that was popular by that same name. This is the playbill from that time. And I think the idea of melting pot and the assimilation theory that sort of goes along with it may have resulted in some unintended consequences. And that's my talk title today, Unintended Consequences, as we continue our exploration of oneness, diversity, and inclusion through the background of that really fun little film, Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo. Now, if you remember last week, we left Nemo in the fish tank with his fish friends in the dentist office, and they were plotting their escape from the tank. Remember that? And I love the fish tank example for the metaphor of a melting pot, because all of these fish are deposited in there from all these different places, right? And everyone, Nemo, of course, came from the sea, and everybody else in the tank, except for one fish, was from a pet store. So they had completely different backgrounds than Nemo had. And the one fish that was also from the sea, Gil, he was the one that was the one in charge, if you remember. He was the one in charge. And he was captured from the sea as well and deposited in the tank, just like Nemo. And if you remember, again, when Nemo was deposited in the tank, he was afraid. Remember what his dad had always told him? The ocean's a dangerous place. It's not safe in the ocean. It's a dangerous place. And so Nemo had that concept. And now here he was in this very small place, much smaller than his ocean home. And he didn't know what was in there, so he had to assume it was not a safe place. But what happened? All of the fish embraced him, didn't they? They all embraced him. Now, he had a few things not going for him. He didn't look like the rest of the fish, did he? He was the only clownfish in there. He came from the sea. He wasn't like them. They came from a pet store. He was different. And he had a handicap, didn't he? He had one little fin that was smaller than the others. So he wasn't normal like the rest of the fish either. But they embraced him. They welcomed him into their home. They welcomed him. Well, it turns out that Gil, because of his origin in the sea, was always plotting to get out of the tank and get back to the sea, and he tried several times and failed. But if you remember last week when Nemo got stuck up in the filter tube, remember when he first got in the tank, he got sucked up in the tube and got stuck, and the other fish wanted to help him out, and Gil's like, no, he got in there, you can get out. Well, he was hatching a plan, because he figured out that Nemo could get through that tube. He was the right size, and he was hatching another plan. So his plan was that first Nemo would swim up that tube, and that Gil would toss him a pebble from the bottom of the aquarium, and Nemo would slodge that into the filter, the spinning filter up top, and stop it. And then he would be able to swim back down the tube because the pump wasn't pulling the water through the tube anymore. And then the tank would start to get dirty and green and algae. And then the dentist would have to take all the fish out and put them in these little baggies and put them on the counter. And then while he's busy cleaning the tank, the fish are going to roll themselves across the counter, out the window, across the road, and into Sydney Harbor and escape to the sea. What could possibly go wrong? Well, seemed like the plan was working. Nemo swam up the tube. Gil tossed him the stone, the pebble. The pebble, Nemo lodged it in there. And he's excited, and he comes back, and he gets in the tube, and he starts to swim down, and the pebble jumps. And then the pebble comes out, and the fan starts to spin again. And the water gets sucked back up through the tube, along with Nemo. Well, Nemo is screaming for Gil and the friends, please help me, please help me. And they run and they swim, and they grab a plant from the bottom of the aquarium, and they push it up in the tube, and Nemo bites it with his teeth, and they pull him out into safety, and Nemo is really scared. It was a close call, and everybody in the tank is really upset too, and it's kind of a touching moment, but the most upset is Gil, because it was Gil's plan, and he saw what could almost have happened. So Gil was really, really upset. Unintended consequences. They didn't intend for Nemo to get hurt. They intended to dirty up the tank so they could escape. They didn't intend for Nemo to get hurt. Sometimes unintended consequences can be life or death. They can be create an economic hardship. They can create a broken heart. But as I thought about this week and the principles of the science of mind, I had to wonder, if it's all God and all law, how could anything be unintended? How could anything be unintended? I'm going to invite you to think about a relationship that you may have had in the past. Maybe it was romantic, maybe it was a business partnership or a business relationship or a boss sometime or a family member or a friend. And it wasn't working out real well, and you decided to leave. And when you left, you blamed that other person for what happened, what went wrong, how it wasn't working. They didn't appreciate you. The boss didn't pay you enough. They didn't appreciate your talents, or the friend didn't honor your time, or whatever it was. Maybe they were just plain nuts, right? Whatever the reason. But you blamed them, and you just stacked that on the shelf and said, that's their stuff, right? That's their stuff. But then you moved on and you found that the next boss, the next boy, the next girl, the next friend, whatever, was the same way. Was exactly the same way. And then you begin to make up the story that all men are, all women are, all bosses are. Again, fill in the blanks. Fill in the blanks. It's another example of unintended consequences, isn't it? We intended to leave that and go find something better, a better relationship, a better friend, a better boss. But somehow we're getting the same thing. We're getting the same thing. Maybe a more accurate title for my talk would be unconscious consequences. Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Centers for Spiritual Living and the author of The Science of Mind, the philosophy that we teach from, he says that the laws of the universe work alike for all, whether we are consciously or unconsciously using them. He loved to use the example of electricity, because electricity just simply is. And we can choose how we want to use it to cook our meal or to burn our house down, right? To electrocute ourselves or to keep our homes nice and cool. It's the same electricity. It's the same law. It works alike for everybody. It's not going to work for Diane and not for Lynn. It's going to work alike for everybody. In the example of relationship, I think we can see what needs healing is our self-love, isn't it? It's our self-love that needs to be healed, because we keep calling back into us the same person or personality as we've always experienced. The one that we just rejected, the one that we just blamed. The law is working perfectly, though, according to our beliefs, whether we consciously know them or not. And that's where the challenge comes in, isn't it? We think we're going down the road and we're creating and doing our intentions and everything and expecting something wonderful, and then it's not so wonderful. And then we say, hey, what happened there? Is the law not working today? Is it on vacation? What's going on? But this is where our spiritual practices come in handy for us, because this is the way that we begin to realize that life truly is a reflection of our beliefs, our thinking, and our thoughts. We begin to realize that. I want to go back for a moment to the idea of the melting pot and this theory of assimilation. Frankly, since I heard this, even as a child and in school, young person in school, I struggled with it. I'm from Virginia, and Virginia, we get really steeped in American history, particularly the 13 colonies, particularly because Virginia was such a big deal of that. Jamestown, Williamsburg, Roanoke Island stuff, all that stuff. And we're really steeped in that. So when I start hearing this idea that everybody's supposed to come over here and suddenly be the same, I wondered, wouldn't that mean we all became Native Americans and followed that cultural norm? But it was just a very confusing concept for me. And I think the unintended consequence out of the melting pot assimilation theory is a loss of that culture and identity. And it's probably the source of this idea that we sometimes hear or see out in print sometimes, maybe even as they should speak our language. They should be like us. They should. Whatever that us happens to be, right? Whatever that us happens to be. We say that we're diverse, and I think we are. We're very diverse. We're all individualized and unique expressions of the divine. Very, very diverse. We say we're inclusive, provided you're like us, right? I'm inclusive as long as you're like me. We have a tendency to think that unconsciously. And I don't really, we kind of mushed this idea of diversity, inclusion together, and I don't think they are. For me, diversity is a whole lot of not the same. And we are that. We're a whole lot of not the same. But inclusion is love. Inclusion is love. It's almost like the idea of God forgiving. God doesn't forgive because God doesn't know about any mistakes or anything to forgive. Forgiveness is a human thing. And inclusion is this human thing where we're really in this idea of separation if we need inclusion. We're missing the mark of oneness. Inclusion is love. Inclusion is love. And that's why I love this movie. That's why I chose it this month, because I knew what we were talking about. In this movie, all the fish are vastly different. If you've ever seen a tropical aquarium or gone snorkeling in the ocean, you see all the beautiful differences in the fish and things. And if these fish came from a pet store, the reef, or the open ocean, they were communicating, they were helping each other, they were companionable, they were inclusive. Ernest Holmes says in The Science of Mind, we're told to resist not evil, to love our enemies, and to do good to them who would do us evil, for this is to manifest the spirit of love, which is God. God loves all alike and causes the rain to fall and the sun to shine alike upon all. In arms which are all inclusive, divine love encompasses everything. So how was last week for you? Your spiritual practice last week was to choose love over fear always. Was it easy? Was it challenging? Was it empowering? Choose love over fear always. If you recall, Ernest said, if we want to be free from suffering, we have to stop inflicting it. If we want love, we have to love no matter what. If we no longer want to be condemned, we must no longer condemn somebody else. Judge not, lest ye be judged. These are universal principles that teach us that what we believe and what we put out comes back to us. It's that idea of reflection. These are very powerful words to live by if we're really going to create a world that works for all. Another idea that I think gets scrambled up in this conversation of diversity and inclusion is the word tolerance. The word tolerance. I'm being tolerant. I tolerate diversity. I'm polite. I'm not resisting it. I'm tolerant. Well, that's not it either, is it? Being tolerant is not inclusive. It's not being in the one. It's not being in the one. We don't just tolerate others. We include them in this spirit of oneness, and we show loving, universal loving kindness. The kind that Nemo experienced in all of his adventures. We'll see how the fish in the fish tank helped him, and then as we complete the movie, how all the other animals and fish helped him along the way. And then Dory and Marlin, his dad, they were helped tremendously on their exploration across from the Great Barrier Reef all the way into Sydney on finding Nemo. Whales helped. Turtles helped. Even the sharks and the pelicans helped. Usually adversaries, right? Predators. Usually predators. And they helped. Inclusive means love. It means understanding that we are all one, understanding the universal life principle of oneness that we teach here in Centers for Spiritual Living. No thing is separate. No thing is separate. Do you remember last week when I talked about Dr. Dan, the dentist diver? He's all the D's, Dr. Dan, the dentist diver. He told his patient, I saved that little clownfish. He was struggling to survive out there on the reef. He projected his beliefs, his fear, perhaps, of living in the ocean on little Nemo. And because of that projection, he took Nemo. He took him away. According to Alan Cohen, the author of our book of the month that Diane was telling us about, A Course in Miracles Made Easy, the antidote to projection is extension. Extension means that we recognize godly attributes within ourselves and we extend them to enfold the world we perceive outside of us. Extension includes and embraces projection, splits, and disowns. If Dr. Dan, the dentist diver, had understood oneness and the sacredness of all life, he never would have taken Nemo from his natural habitat, would he? He wouldn't have projected that out there on him. And the easy thing about this idea of extension is that these godly attributes that Alan is speaking of and the Course in Miracles is speaking of is that we already have them. We already have them. We just need to become more familiar with those godly attributes than our fear. Your song was perfect, Jeannie. Your song was perfect. We must first recognize that within ourselves, these godly attributes, so that we can then extend them to others. Ernest reminds us in his little book, Help for Today, there is no need to fear anything in this life if we believe that, called on or not, God is always present. Now, the caps are Ernest's. Anytime he wanted to really make a point and get our attention, it's all caps. It's all caps. And this was his all caps. There is no need to fear anything if we believe that, called on or not, God is always present. If we believe that we have available at all times the wisdom that created this universe and which can and will overcome anything that disturbs us, we shall never be afraid. Stay with the one. God is always here. We don't have to beseech and beg God, okay, it's my turn, come talk to me. God is always here, called or not. Always. So perhaps this old teaching of the melting pot and assimilation, where everybody gets assimilated, is beginning to fall away, and we're beginning to see more of a multicultural approach to life. Some call this the salad bowl as opposed to a melting pot these days. I had not come across that until my research this week. And it's all the individualized expressions that we are, the lettuce and the tomato and the cucumbers and all the individual stuff that you see in a salad that makes it so yummy, but the dressing of universal love, of universal laws, of wholeness and oneness, the dressing of that is what pulls it all together and brings delight of that salad. So it's time for true inclusion, perhaps, recognizing that as love and knowing and accepting our own universal oneness with all that is. So I want to close this today with our spiritual practices for this week, and I first want to apologize to everybody that did not get the Mindful Monday newsletter last week. It was my fault. I didn't get it out, so I apologize for that. It is ready to go for tomorrow. And if you are not on that mailing list, you can sign up if you're in the room and our sheet outside. And if you're online and would like to sign up, just send an email to me at scottsdalecsl.org, and I'll get you on the list to make sure you get that. So this Mindful Monday is just giving you the notes and some quotes and a deeper practice on your spiritual practices for the week so you can apply them and work with them throughout the week ahead. So number 1, consider an unintended consequence you may have experienced in your life. Recall the event and ask what belief is being reflected back to you as that consequence. Now, this doesn't have to be negative. It might be negative, but it can also be positive. Sometimes we surprise ourselves with our brilliance and magnificence when we maybe get out of our routine, when something different happens, and we go, wow, that worked out great. That's a belief that we have. That's our spiritual magnificence coming forth to manifest in unexpected ways for us. And it may be something that was the other side of that, where it's a growing opportunity, a growing edge for you. But think about that. Meditate and journal your thoughts for a bigger understanding, for a greater understanding of the belief, and see if it still serves you, or maybe it doesn't. Number 2 is practice extension, the antidote for projection. And notice any blocks or resistance to this practice, and ask if a projection is standing in your way. One of your beliefs that you're projecting on life, is that standing in your way? And use your spiritual practices again on this and reveal and transform the thought. Sounds great. How do we do that? How do we do that? How do we practice this? There's a very good illustrative story in our book of the month that Alan tells. He's a great storyteller. If you've never read his stuff, he's a wonderful storyteller. But this story is about a duck named Pete. And Pete lives on an organic farm. And he loves to sit by the path where everybody goes to and from the dining hall. And he's sitting on the path one morning, and he always quacks at people as they walk by. And this particular morning, a professional singer walked by. And as Pete's quacking at her, she walks by, she stops and she says, "Well, Pete, thank you for such a beautiful morning song." And she goes on about her way. And the next person that walks by happens to be someone that's a little overweight. And Pete's quacking, and she stops and she looks and she says, "Pete, you're always begging for food. You've got to stay on your diet." And the next one walks by is a college professor. And as she walks by, Pete's quacking at her, and she says, "Pete, the questions, always the questions. How about some answers for a change? How about some answers for a change?" Each person saw Pete through the lens of their own self-perception. And they projected their worldview onto a duck. A duck. Imagine what we do to each other when we actually understand the language. The projection that we do. Alan suggests that we only ever speak to ourselves. That's a scary thought, isn't it? We're only ever speaking to ourselves. Consider that. Notice your conversations this week and recognize where you're projecting your self-perception rather than extending love and kindness. Think about Pete. I want to leave you today with a couple of, actually 3 good unintended consequences. Number 1, rhino poaching plummets 53% during the lockdowns. The poachers aren't out of their houses. They're having to stay locked down, so the rhinos are thriving. There's an elephant baby boom in Kenya. No tourists. And my favorite has to be the unsold beer from Australia's lockdown is making renewable energy in record amounts. Now, I love that story. When Australia shut down in March because of COVID, huge stores of beer went stale. In South Australia, almost 40,000 gallons of expired beer has been donated every week to a water treatment plant. And the beer is converted into biogas, which then gets used as electricity to power the plant and about 1,200 homes. Is that the coolest thing? And they don't know really why production has escalated so much because of the beer, something to do with the way the biogas is created, but they say it's at giddy new levels. Last joke. Okay. So good does all abound around us. It really does. And it's so easy to get myopically focused on statistics and politics and all the other crazy things that are going on out there. Broaden your view. Look for the good. Praise the good. Know that it's still happening. There's still good stuff happening. Thank God. And so it is. Would you join me for an affirmative prayer? Oh, goodness. Recognizing the good that God is always. That one life, that one power, that one presence, the harmony of life, the order, the peace, the infinite love. God is all of this and so much more. So difficult to even begin to describe the presence from a limited mind and perspective of this human perspective. But we know that it's all. We know that it's love. We know that it's unconditional. And we know that it's here now, present in this room. As Ernest says, called or not, God is all. And so we recognize that our unity in that presence, in that one, united together in the love and the peace and the wholeness, the joy, united in the good. And so from this good place, I speak my word for and about each of us as we gather here today, recognizing that there are no unintentions. All that we do is intentional. The law works for us, always works for us. And we are grateful for the choices that we have, for the ability that we have, for the mind that we have to change and create anew and choose anew and see a world changed as we become it. And I know this day, for anyone that has anything on their heart that they are seeking prayer around, as they lift it into this time of prayer, into this collective consciousness of this group, that we know that whatever needs to be revealed is revealed, or healed is healed, that if financial flow is necessary, that it is flowing with ease and with grace and the abundance of God, pressed down to overflowing. And we know love, for love is all that there is. And it is with great gratitude and joy that I release this into the action of law, the activity of mind, and we affirm together, and so it is.